Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are opening the file on a single astonishing military victory, one that frankly didn't look like a victory at all until the clock struck, 4 in the afternoon. We're talking about a Battle of Marengo in 1800.
Exactly. It's such a dramatic story.
It really is. If you look at Napoleon Bonaparte's career, he spent decades building this image of, unstoppable, almost divine genius on the battlefield. But the Marengo story is fundamentally different. This is a story of a pivotal, terrifying, and just an utterly dramatic comeback.
A comeback that he absolutely needed.
He really did. Our mission today is, I think, critical for understanding early 19th century European history. We're going to track, kind of minute by minute, how Napoleon went from staring down the barrel of absolute defeat on an Italian field, a defeat that could have ended his political career right then and there, to securing an absolute triumph. And this victory didn't just win a battle, it cemented his fragile political future as the new first consul of France.
Right. And to set the stage for you, you have to remember the deep political context here. This battle, it takes place near Alessandria in Italy, and it's a defining moment of the War of the Second Coalition.
Oh, okay.
Now, for anyone who isn't, steeped in the French Revolutionary Wars, the coalition was basically every major European monarchy. Austria, Britain, Russia, all aligned against the French Republic. They were determined to roll back the revolution and curb French expansion.
So the stakes couldn't be higher.
Couldn't be higher. And Napoleon had seized power only months earlier in a coup, making himself first consul. He needed a spectacular victory, and he needed it fast, to legitimize his regime against both his rivals at home and his enemies abroad.
Exactly. He had to prove he wasn't just another temporary dictator. But what's so fascinating here is that the opening moves of the battle were a complete disaster for the French. The sources just paint a picture of chaos from the very beginning.
Total chaos.
So let's unpack that initial crisis. Napoleon was taken by surprise, wasn't he? He dispersed his forces, thinking the main Austrian army, led by General Melas, was retreating.
That was the assumption.
But instead, the Austrians launched this powerful offensive. The French were quickly outnumbered and systematically driven back. They were just caught completely flat-footed.
It wasn't just a tough fight. It was a near collapse. By the early afternoon, say around 2 p.m., the French faced what military records pretty much universally describe as near defeat. The Austrian momentum was just overwhelming.
And to really understand the gravity of that tactical situation, we need to talk about the flank, right?
Yes, the flank. The French line was continuously being pushed back, and the Austrians were actively threatening to turn the French right flank, which means, they were trying to get behind the French line of battle.
And for those of us who don't spend our weekends reading Clausewitz, what does turning the flank mean, and why is that so devastating?
Well, think of an army line like a hinge on a door. If you hold the center, you can pivot, but if the enemy swings around and hits the hinge, the flank, the entire door just slams shut.
Ah, okay.
So if the Austrians had successfully turned that French right flank, the French army wouldn't just retreat, it would dissolve into a catastrophic rout.
Wow.
They'd have been surrounded, forced to surrender piecemeal. It would have been the end of the campaign, and like you said, probably the end of Napoleon's career.
So total disaster is unfolding, yet the French somehow managed to survive that initial tidal wave. Who bought them that time?
Two crucial figures, General Jean Lannes and General Claude Victor. Their actions in those early hours are really the unsung heroism of Marengo. They managed to conduct a strategic withdrawal under heavy, sustained fire.
So they weren't just running?
No, not at all. They were pulling back in organized stages, firing, retreating, and reforming their lines.
Incredible discipline.
It was. Lannes and Victor took massive casualties, but their disciplined maneuvering, preventing their lines from completely dissolving, is what kept the French army alive just long enough. They were the anchor for the rest of the day.
That resilience bought precious hours. And this is where we see Napoleon's skill, not necessarily in the initial flawless plan, which clearly failed, but in damage control. What was he doing while Lannes and Victor were absorbing that blow?
He was trying to stop the bleeding, basically. Even as the retreat got worse, Napoleon recognized that the right flank was the immediate point of failure. So he repositioned every single available troop he had, mostly his consular guard, to act as a temporary counterweight.
His personal reserve.
To personal reserves. It was a desperate stopgap measure, but it maintained just enough cohesion to allow his main body to pull back toward the village of Marengo itself. He needed a miracle, but he was at least delaying the inevitable collapse.
And that desperation brings us right to the most dramatic moment of the entire battle. The sort of last-minute intervention that defines history. We're transitioning now from the brink of total defeat when General Melas, the Austrian commander, felt so confident he actually went back to his tent to write up his victory dispatch to the sudden start of the comeback. This is where the story hinges. The sudden and critically timely arrival of reinforcements. That's the aha moment. The moment the agonizing retreat finally stops and the counter-assault begins.
The timing is just the stuff of historical legend. It's incredible. Napoleon had previously detached General Desaix and his troops. He'd sent them south on a reconnaissance mission because he wasn't sure where the main Austrian force was.
Right, the earlier mistake.
The mistake. But upon hearing the distant sounds of the battle getting louder, Desaix, on his own initiative, just reverses course and marches back toward the fight. He arrives on the field around 3 p.m. to find the French situation in absolute shambles. And Napoleon famously greets him, explains the disaster, and reportedly asks for his opinion. And Desaix just looks at the chaos and replies with his calm assurance. The battle is completely lost, but there is time to win another.
I love that quote. It's just perfect. It perfectly captures that spirit of turning a disaster into an opportunity. So Desaix then leads this decisive counterattack. Can you describe that moment for us?
He didn't waste a second. Desaix took his fresh corps, about 6,000 troops, and just slammed them directly into the Austrian center, right where the enemy was most exhausted and frankly disorganized from their successful pursuit. The Austrians, believing they had already won, were just stunned.
It reversed the psychological and physical momentum almost instantly, didn't it? Desaix's assault didn't just stabilize the line, it turned the retreat into this sudden, powerful push forward. We know the Austrians had started relaxing their formation.
Precisely. They were in pursuit formation, not prepared for a fresh, concentrated attack. The shockwave was devastating. Desaix's push routed the Austrian center and almost immediately caused widespread panic and surrender in that sector.
But the victory wasn't secured by Desaix's charge alone. It still required that final coordination of arms to really exploit the shock.
Absolutely. The victory was ultimately sealed by one of the most famous cavalry charges in Napoleonic history, led by General Murat.
Who would later become his brother-in-law.
The very same. Murat's heavy cavalry smashed into the exposed Austrian infantry, following up right on the heels of Desaix's breakthrough.
So it was this combined arms action.
Exactly. Desaix's infantry shock followed by Murat's cavalry hammer. That's what transformed a successful counterattack into an irreversible, comprehensive victory by nightfall. The Austrians were completely broken. And General Melas, having already written his victory dispatch, was forced to accept a crushing defeat.
The victory was comprehensive, but that turning point came at such a devastating personal cost. General Desaix, the man who saved Napoleon's career, was tragically killed during that decisive charge.
He was killed instantly by a musket ball, securing the victory even as his life ended. It truly puts a face on the human cost and the sheer contingency of this battle. His sacrifice immediately became a core piece of Napoleon's propaganda around Marengo.
And cost is the right word. Let's move to the next part and detail the heavy price that was paid. This was not a cheap win.
Far from it. Marengo was exceptionally costly for both sides, which really speaks to the intensity of those late afternoon hours. The French, despite winning, lost about 6,000 soldiers. That's roughly a quarter of their entire fighting force engaged that day.
A quarter. That's an enormous loss rate.
It's staggering. You can't sustain that.
No. Yet the Austrians suffered even worse.
They did. The Austrians lost over 9,000 men killed, wounded, or captured. That's more than a third of their entire army. Plus, they lost a huge amount of artillery and vital standards. The difference is, the French could absorb the cost, because they achieved their strategic objective.
And what were those immediate, tangible military guarantees? Beyond the casualty figures, the victory instantly guaranteed French control over northern Italy.
The leverage was just immense. The very next day, the Austrians, having lost their army in the field, signed the Convention of Alessandria. This convention forced them to evacuate key strategic territories. They had to immediately pull out of Piedmont, Genoa, and the entire region of Lombardy.
So Napoleon didn't just win a single battle. He instantly reconquered a huge swath of territory that Austria held. That dramatically consolidated French power in the region and essentially neutralized the Austrian threat in Italy for years.
It was a strategic masterstroke disguised as a lucky escape. Now, let's transition, as you suggested, from the tactics to the true political earthquake of Marengo. Why did this battle, a desperate comeback, transcend mere military success and become a political necessity?
Right, this is the crux of why we're diving so deep. Napoleon had very recently seized power as first consul. What does that term even mean for our listener? It sounds vaguely Roman, but what was the reality of his power?
First consul was really just a veneer of republicanism over what was functionally a military dictatorship. When he took power in the coup of 18 Brumaire, the French Republic was unstable. You had powerful factions in Paris, royalists who wanted the Bourbons back, and radical Jacobins who hated military power, and they were all deeply suspicious of Napoleon. His power was utterly fragile.
He was ruling on credit, basically.
Exactly. He was ruling on credit.
And Marengo paid off that credit. The victory was a colossal political asset. The news got to Paris quickly, and it silenced his critics almost immediately.
It did. It proved that the upheaval of the coup was worth it, because the new leader could deliver the military victories that the revolution needed. It fundamentally strengthened his hold as France's head of state.
It wasn't just about silencing critics, though. It was about creating a narrative. The sources talk about the powerful public image this created. He went from being a talented general to a leader favored by destiny itself. He was almost beaten, yet pulled off a miracle. And this miracle was immediately codified into political propaganda.
Absolutely. The legend of Marengo was born instantly. It secured his position and gave him the popular mandate he desperately craved. He proved he could lead armies personally and pull victory from the jaws of defeat. It legitimized the entire coup of 18 Brumaire.
And this leads directly to the question of imperial ambition, doesn't it? Marengo showed Europe that France, under Napoleon's singular command, was resurgent.
That's right. It served as an unmistakable warning to the European monarchies. After Marengo, the Second Coalition just began to crumble. Austria was forced to sue for peace the following year, which led to the Treaty of Luneville. It even forced Britain, now without European allies, to eventually sign the Peace of Amiens.
So it bought him peace?
It bought Napoleon two things: internal stability and external peace on his own terms. And this period of peace allowed him to restructure France's entire economy, its administration, its legal system, establishing the foundations of the Napoleonic Code, and crucially, establishing the groundwork for his eventual transition from first consul to emperor.
Wow.
He would never have been able to declare himself emperor in 1804 without the political capital he gained at Marengo.
So this is more than just a battle. It's a necessary step on the ladder to empire. Marengo is always considered one of Napoleon's greatest comebacks, because it wasn't just about military genius under pressure. It was about securing political legitimacy at the precise moment he needed it most. He literally needed that bayonet charge to justify his claim to power.
This deep dive really just underlines the sheer contingency in history. Sometimes the vast trajectory of nations and empires is decided not by flawless, brilliant planned strategy.
Because Napoleon's initial strategy was faulty.
It was. It's decided by the sheer raw drama of overcoming seemingly impossible odds, often relying on the timely, voluntary action of a subordinate general.
It truly is a remarkable event. And as we finish up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a provocative thought to consider. Given how close the French were to absolute campaign-ending defeat that afternoon, forcing Melas to retract his own victory dispatch, how much of Napoleon's subsequent history, his crowning himself emperor, his march across Europe, the redrawing of the entire continent, was contingent upon the timely arrival and the sacrifice of one man, General Desaix? Was destiny truly saved by a lucky detour and a general's decisive willingness to sacrifice everything? Think about the ripple effects of that single chaotic afternoon.
A powerful question.
That's all we have time for today on the deep dive. Thanks for joining us. Okay, picture this. It's the year 1800. We're on these flat plains near Marengo in Italy. And for Napoleon Bonaparte, this rising star in France, the day is turning into an absolute catastrophe.
And we're not talking about a minor setback here. This is, potentially the end of his entire Italian campaign.
The end of his career, maybe. His army is shattered. They are literally running for their lives. And the Austrians, who are totally convinced they've won, are moving in for the final blow.
The coup de grace, yeah.
But then, right at that moment, history just pivots. A general shows up, sees this total wreckage of the French position, and instead of just accepting defeat, he says something. I mean, one of the most audacious things in military history, and it just flips the whole script. Today, we are taking a deep dive into that man, General Louis-Charles Antoine Desaix, and that incredible reversal at the Battle of Marengo.
That's an amazing story.
Our mission, really, is to track the exact sequence of events here. We want to understand the failure that made his arrival so necessary, and then really unpack that shocking quote and the action that turned this disaster into a spectacular victory.
A victory that cost him his life.
Exactly. We're looking at the weight of one person's leadership against what looked like, historical certainty.
And I think it's vital we establish who Desaix was right off the bat. To get the power of his words at Marengo, you really need to know who was saying them. Our sources frame him as, much more than just a competent general. He was one of the most trusted, most strategically brilliant commanders France had during the Revolutionary Wars.
And he'd been in some tough spots before.
Oh, absolutely. He earned his stripes in really challenging theaters. He led forces in the Rhine campaigns in Germany, which gave him this reputation for discipline against, Egypt was huge. He was a major figure there, especially after his victory against the Mamluks at the Battle of the Pyramids. And his campaign in Upper Egypt. That really showed off his tenacity.
And it wasn't just about winning battles, from what the sources say. He was revered for his character.
That's it. It was a rare combination. He had this, high-level strategic mind, but also a real charisma that made his men fiercely loyal.
So when he walks onto a battlefield, even one as broken as Marengo, his word isn't just advice.
It's gospel.
Yeah.
Precisely. That prior success is why Napoleon himself had such implicit faith in him. He wasn't just another general. He was Napoleon's friend, a trusted peer. And that credibility is the invisible force behind his words when everyone else is panicking.
He had the receipts, as they say.
He absolutely did.
But Marengo, it required more than just confidence. This was about reversing a massive tactical blunder.
A huge one.
If we look at the days leading up to June 14th, 1800, that's where the crisis begins. Napoleon crosses the Alps, which is daring, but then he completely misjudges where the main Austrian army is.
Yeah, this is a critical point in the sources. Napoleon was convinced the Austrian general Melas was retreating or avoiding a fight. So he splits his forces critically.
He sends out detachments to hunt them down, including Desaix's group, his main reserve force.
Exactly. So when the Austrians launch their powerful sudden attack at Marengo, Napoleon is caught completely off guard. He's strategically surprised, and in that specific location, he's outnumbered.
The numbers are pretty stark, right? It was something like 22,000 French against 31,000 Austrians.
And the Austrians were aggressive. That initial phase of the battle was just disastrous for the French. The sheer weight of the Austrian attack, their artillery, it forced the French back all morning.
And by the afternoon, the French lines weren't just bent, they were broken.
Completely broken. We're talking about mass disorder. Eyewitness accounts talk about cannons being abandoned, entire regiments just dissolving. The roads were flooded with wounded men trying to escape east.
It was chaos. You can just imagine the scene, thick with dust from the retreat, the smell of gunpowder, and just this absolute psychological certainty of defeat.
It was so bad that the Austrian general Melas, he actually thought the battle was over. He handed command to his chief of staff and went back to Alessandria to write his victory dispatch.
That one detail says it all. The French army wasn't just beaten, it was officially and psychologically routed. The battle, according to everyone there, was completely lost.
Even Napoleon was reportedly just crestfallen. He knew what this defeat meant.
And that's the moment, the absolute lowest point for the French. That's when Desaix and his forces finally show up.
He'd been delayed, recalled by these frantic couriers. But that delay, it was perfect timing, in a way.
Like the cavalry arriving just in time.
It really was. He didn't bring a huge force, but he brought the exact right force. About 6,000 fresh, disciplined men.
And the artillery.
And critically, 9 pieces of light field artillery that could be moved fast. Look, when an army of 22,000 is collapsing, 6,000 organized troops can feel like 60,000. Their psychological value was just immense.
So Desaix rides up, he sees the retreating men, the victorious Austrians advancing, and he meets Napoleon. You have the greatest military mind of a generation facing total ruin, and his most trusted friend riding into the middle of it.
And this is where history becomes legend. Desaix's assessment wasn't, flowery or political, it was blunt. He looks at the smoking debris, looks at Napoleon, and delivers that immortal line.
This battle is completely lost.
However, there is time to win another.
It's just an astounding quote. First, he completely affirms the reality: we lost. No sugarcoating.
Right.
That pivot in the second sentence, there is time to win another, that is pure leadership. It just instantly resets the timeline. What happened before is irrelevant. The new battle starts now.
And it wasn't just blind optimism. That second part is rooted in tactical observation. Desaix saw the state of the Austrians.
Okay, so what did he see?
Well, they'd been fighting for hours, they were tired, and maybe a little overconfident. They were advancing in this sort of dispersed formation, thinking the day was done.
Yeah.
They'd won the marathon, and now they were just walking the victory lap.
Their success made them vulnerable.
Precisely. They were focused on pursuit, taking prisoners, not bracing for a fresh, coordinated counterattack. That window of complacency is what Desaix identifies as the chance for another battle.
And he gives Napoleon back his agency, right? He doesn't dwell on the mistake. He hands him a concrete plan.
Immediately. The sources suggest the decision to counterattack was almost instant. It was driven by Desaix's infectious confidence and urgency.
And he didn't wait around. He took his 6,000 men and immediately threw them into the fight to stop the retreat.
He forms a solid line, basically. It gave the broken regiments something to rally behind. A critical first step, stabilizing the position.
But stabilization wasn't going to win the day.
No, they needed a decisive blow. So Desaix leads his infantry straight at the main Austrian advance, which was led by General Zach. It was a high-stakes frontal assault.
And those 9 fresh guns.
They were deployed rapidly, started shelling the confused Austrian lines at point-blank range. And this is where the genius of the new plan really comes together. As Desaix's infantry is hitting them from the front, Napoleon coordinates the final piece.
General Kellerman's heavy cavalry.
The knockout punch. Kellerman's cavalry was hidden by smoke and terrain, and they just burst onto the Austrian flank, crashing right into the columns that Desaix was engaging.
So they were hit from the front and the side simultaneously.
The shock was total. Fresh infantry, new cannons, and a devastating cavalry charge. It was just too much for the exhausted and surprised Austrians.
The transformation was instant.
In absolute. The Austrian column was thrown into complete disarray. General Zach himself was captured. What had been a triumphal march a few minutes before was now a panicked rout.
A complete reversal of what had happened to the French army just hours earlier.
It was Desaix's leadership that made it happen. The French went from total collapse to this overwhelming, spectacular victory.
The triumph came at the ultimate cost.
Yeah, it's a tragedy at the heart of the story. Desaix was leading from the very front of that critical counterattack.
The one that won the day.
The one that won the day. And he was struck. The accounts say he was shot directly through the heart by a musket ball. Killed instantly. He fell at the very moment his brilliant plan guaranteed victory.
So he never even got to see it. He never saw the Austrian army collapse or the celebrations.
No. And Napoleon, who had just been saved from ruin, was apparently devastated by the loss of his friend and his best commander.
That fatal role, though, it cemented his legacy. It turned a strategic victory into an enduring myth.
It did. His sacrifice ensured the success of the Second Italian campaign, which bolstered Napoleon's political power back in Paris.
Yeah.
I mean, if the French lose Marengo, the ripple effects on Napoleon's rise could have been catastrophic.
So, in a very real way, Desaix traded his life for Napoleon's power and the future of French dominance in Italy.
His death was maybe the single greatest loss of that entire campaign.
So, when we do this deep dive, what does it really tell us about leadership in a crisis? It seems like it tells you that conviction can be more important than strategy sometimes.
I think so. Desaix arrived on a field where the game was already lost, but he just redefined the objective. He realized that while the French had lost the morning, the Austrians had wasted the afternoon through complacency.
And it highlights those small technical details, too. It wasn't just men, it was fresh men, and that modal artillery.
Exactly. That allowed them to deliver a powerful, concentrated punch right where the Austrians were weakest.
Yeah.
It wasn't magic. It was impeccable timing and clarity from a commander willing to pay the highest price.
So we've covered his essential role, saving a lost battle with a small force, delivering that legendary quote that reset the army's morale, and, securing the victory with his own life.
And that really leads to the final thought we want to leave you with. Think about the paradox of it all. Desaix achieves this defining, overwhelming victory and dies in the same instant. He makes a single costly decision that outweighs hours of setbacks and literally changes the course of history. So we're left to consider the sheer weight of personal courage and whether destiny sometimes demands that ultimate sacrifice from the one person who can turn the tide.
What does it mean to win a battle if the victory requires losing the one person who made it possible?
Exactly. It raises a huge question about the cost of heroism and the very lonely pinnacle of command. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are strapping on our shakos and heading straight into the smoke and the chaos of early 19th century Europe.
We are. Our target is the Battle of Marengo, June 14th, 1800.
A date that is just infamous for being one of the greatest near defeats in military history, but it ends in this stunning victory that really cements Napoleon's power.
It's a fascinating one. It looks less like a straightforward triumph and, more like a tactical magic trick. You have a French army that is, by noon, essentially beaten, routed, and retreating.
So our mission today?
Our mission is to extract the core tactical mechanics, the specific coordinated actions, and the moments of decision that allowed Napoleon to not just halt the rout, but turn it into a decisive, campaign-winning counteroffensive.
But really drilling down on the how. How did the command structure manage this pivot under just extreme pressure?
Exactly. This isn't just about Napoleon being, some kind of charismatic genius on a horse.
Right.
It's about applied military science. It's about timing. We're looking at the synergy between infantry, artillery, and cavalry, all committed at the exact moment of maximum enemy vulnerability.
So we're looking at 4 critical phases, right? Recognizing the collapse, stabilizing the front, launching that decisive countershock, and then delivering the finishing blow.
If you understand the orchestration of those 4 phases, you really understand why Marengo is still taught in war colleges. It was an improvised masterpiece.
Okay, let's set the scene for the drama, because the day started disastrously. By early afternoon, French forces were not just struggling, they were dissolving.
Catastrophic is the word.
The Austrian commander, General Melas, had pushed this coordinated and aggressive attack. How dire was the situation when Napoleon finally recognized the need for immediate, decisive change?
The initial situation was beyond dire. Melas had concentrated massive force, and his plan was working flawlessly. Just perfectly.
So what went wrong for the French initiative?
The French line was stretched incredibly thin. Napoleon had mistakenly believed the Austrians were retreating, so his deployment was too wide.
A huge intelligence failure.
A huge one. So when Melas slammed into the main French position, the French forces, particularly on the right flank, they just couldn't hold. We're talking about divisions being shattered, units losing cohesion.
A generalized retreat.
A retreat that bordered on outright panic. It wasn't just a slow, orderly retreat. It was a loss of control, threatening the entire French position and really Napoleon's entire command structure.
So what was that first key tactical response? What do you do to stop the bleeding on that exposed right flank?
Stabilization. That's the first most crucial response. Napoleon immediately committed resources to that right flank. He recognized that if that flank crumbled, the entire army would just fold back onto itself.
But just defending isn't enough, is it?
No, not at all. Simply defending that flank wasn't enough, because the main Austrian thrust was still advancing right up the center.
So if you just reinforce offensively, you're still just waiting to die, only, a bit slower.
Yeah.
He needed an offensive distraction to buy time.
Precisely. And this is the first real nugget of adaptive genius we see. While he's funneling reinforcements to that vulnerable right flank, he simultaneously orders a localized offensive action towards a place called Castel Sariolo.
Okay, and this wasn't meant to be a breakthrough attack.
Not at all. Its purpose was to fix Austrian forces in place, specifically by engaging Austrian columns that might have otherwise swung wide to complete the envelopment of the French.
So he uses a localized attack not to gain ground, but as a strategic anchor. That action tells the Austrian command, hey, you have an unexpected fight on your hands right here, right now, and it just delays their overall momentum.
Just enough for the right flank stabilization to take hold. It was effective enough to transition from total collapse to hanging on by a thread.
But that's all a defensive maneuver can do in that situation.
Exactly. It bought a crucial 2 or 3 hours of time. But victory required turning the tables. And that brings us to the most debated and maybe most important element of the battle, the crucial late arrival.
And this is where we introduce General Desaix. His arrival around 4 p.m. is often seen as this fortunate accident.
Was it?
Or was it an expertly managed commitment of reserves?
It was a little bit of both, but its application was pure tactical genius. Desaix wasn't originally meant to be there. He'd been detached earlier in the campaign.
Right.
But Napoleon had sent urgent riders throughout the day, and he successfully recalled him. When Desaix arrived, his troops were fresh, having marched hard all day.
And Napoleon didn't just plug them into the line to fill a gap.
No, that's the key. He integrated them into a massive, concentrated counterattack force.
So let's talk about the technical mechanics of that counterattack. Desaix wasn't just just bringing infantry, correct? How did he deploy the critical element of artillery support?
That is the key technical element that people often overlook. Artillery doctrine at the time, it often focused on dispersed battery support. You know, a few guns here, a few guns there.
At Marengo, Napoleon did something different.
Completely different. He ordered the artillery assigned to Desaix's division and any available reserve guns to be massed together. A concentrated battery en masse.
Now, what's the difference in impact between dispersed and massed guns?
A huge difference. A few scattered guns will annoy the enemy. A concentrated battery, we're talking maybe 10 to 12 guns firing rapidly at short range, that creates a tactical shockwave.
So they're not just chipping away.
No, they were used to soften the Austrian center. They aimed directly at the columns that were pressing the hardest. This massed fire created gaps and caused immediate casualties and psychological disorder before Desaix's fresh infantry even closed in.
So the counteroffensive wasn't about slowly pushing back. It was a sudden, violent injection of force supported by this devastating concentrated firepower, aimed directly at the enemy's main and by now very tired forces.
Exactly. Desaix's division hit the Austrian center like a hammer. Their momentum, combined with the shock of that massed artillery, immediately broke the sustained Austrian advance.
And these Austrian units had been fighting and marching all day.
All day. And suddenly they find themselves facing fresh troops backed by a wall of cannon fire. Their momentum just stopped cold and disorder set in.
Now, disorder is one thing, but turning disorder into a complete rout requires something else. And this is where General Kellerman's cavalry enters the narrative to seal the victory.
This is the moment. This is what defines the tactical brilliance of Marengo. Kellerman's cavalry was held back, just waiting for the precise moment Desaix's attack created that vulnerability. They targeted the Austrian left flank near a place called Cascina Grossa.
And the timing here is just.
Yeah.
It's non-negotiable. If they charge a moment too early, the Austrians are ready. They're in square formation.
Yeah.
Too late, and the Austrians recover.
Precisely. Kellerman's brilliance, and maybe a bit of luck, was in waiting until the Austrian grenadier units, which were engaged with Desaix's men, fired a coordinated volley. So as the smoke clears and the Austrian line is momentarily exposed, they're busy fiddling with their powder and wads and ball to reload their muzzle-loading muskets. That fraction of a minute when they are tactically disarmed, that's when Kellerman launched his heavy cavalry.
Can you describe the physical impact of that? We're talking about heavy dragoons, maybe cuirassiers' men, and horses hitting stationary infantry who can't fire back.
It was absolutely devastating. Imagine a wall of heavy horseflesh moving at speed, hitting infantry that cannot fire a protective volley and cannot quickly form a defensive square under that kind of pressure.
So it wasn't just the physical casualties.
No, it was the psychological shock. This swift, perfectly timed cavalry assault tore through the Austrian formations. They even captured General Zach, one of the key Austrian commanders.
Wow.
And it turned that central disorder into an irreversible, chaotic rout.
The synchronization is just breathtaking. Infantry creates the opportunity, artillery amplifies the disorder, and then the cavalry exploits this tiny microscopic window of vulnerability. But let's take a step back, because for Desaix and Kellerman to even have that moment, someone had to endure hours of just brutal combat to hold the line during that agonizing delay. What was the bedrock that allowed for this strategic patience?
That responsibility fell squarely on the French Consular Guard. Their role is perhaps the most heroic of the day, but it's the least dramatically celebrated.
And what was their specific function? These weren't just standard line troops, were they?
Not at all. They were the elite, the best trained, most politically reliable troops Napoleon had. Their function was to serve as the ultimate shock troop reserve, committed only when the situation was absolutely direst.
The last resort.
At the absolute last resort, to stabilize the heart of the line. When the main French forces were collapsing in the mid-afternoon, the Consular Guard was committed to a stubborn defensive stand right at the point of maximum Austrian pressure.
And what did that stand look like, practically speaking, on the ground?
It was a brutal, brutal fight against superior numbers. They just held their ground stubbornly against relentless Austrian dragoons and their elite grenadiers. They took massive hits, using tight formations and disciplined fire, just refusing to yield.
Their sacrifice was essentially a currency to buy time.
That's a perfect way to put it. This wasn't about winning a small skirmish. It was about creating a physical, psychological, and most importantly, a temporal buffer. If the guard had broken, the whole line would have shattered before Desaix even appeared on the horizon.
So their mere presence and their refusal to break, despite these heavy losses, it stabilized the French center long enough for Napoleon to get Desaix's report, plan the artillery deployment, and position Kellerman.
Exactly. They embodied the strategic patience required. They held the anchor while Napoleon prepared the hook. Without the commitment and the pure tenacity of the consular guard, there is no Marengo counterattack. There is only a full-scale French defeat.
It speaks volumes to the concept of the strategic reserve, holding back your best forces until the moment their commitment can yield a maximum impact, even if it means watching your other forces suffer greatly in the meantime. It's a huge risk.
It's the ultimate risk-reward calculation. You commit your last, most reliable troops at the point of existential threat, hoping they can buy you the minutes you need for the rest of your plan to materialize. Had Desaix been delayed even another hour,
it would have all been in vain.
the sacrifice of the consular guard would have been completely in vain.
Okay, so let's synthesize this for everyone listening. When we look at the tactical triumph of Marengo, what are the unified, coordinated components that led to the victory, starting from that moment of near collapse?
Well, we really see a four-step coordinated strategy that moved from crisis management to offensive domination.
Cool.
First, that rapid two-pronged stabilization of the collapse, reinforcing the right flank while simultaneously distracting the Austrians at Castel Sariolo.
Okay, step one.
Second, the deployment of the elite consular guard to serve as that unyielding anchor, buying hours of absolutely crucial time.
Third, the shock injection of Desaix's fresh forces, amplified by that massed artillery fire, hitting the Austrian center to transition the battle from just stabilization to creating enemy disorder.
And finally, the fourth step. The perfect execution of Kellerman's cavalry charge, timed precisely to exploit the enemy's momentary vulnerability during their reload phase. And that's what turned disorder into a complete campaign-ending rout.
It's the highest form of combined arms warfare, but applied not according to some static plan, but adapted moment by moment to the chaos of the battlefield.
It really is the ultimate lesson in adaptability under fire. Knowing the difference between merely charging and strategically ambushing a momentary pause, like targeting the reload, it really elevates your understanding of military command.
This victory wasn't fate. It was the result of a commander seizing a tactical window that lasted, maybe 30 seconds?
Probably. And this raises an important question for you to consider. Marengo demonstrates that a battle can be fundamentally won, not by the initial strength of your forces, but by strategic patience and the commitment of reserves at the absolute last possible moment of maximum pressure.
So what's the question?
If victory hinges on waiting until the point of collapse to commit your last, most vital resource, what does that suggest about the value of sustained defensive operations versus the value of absolute aggressive commitment? What is the ideal balance between just holding the line and emptying the bench?
Food for thought indeed. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into tactical triumph.
My pleasure.
We'll see you next time.